start us off?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Nice to see you all online. A big welcome to our guests. Council members, I know this committee hasn't met in a little bit, and it's good to get back in action here. We have 3 agenda items for you. The first one should be very quick. If you can pull up your board docs, which would be the approval of the minutes from January. And then we'd like to spend the bulk of our time on the energy plan that has been prepared in collaboration between the Clean Energy Commission and town staff. And we have several Clean Energy Commission members with us here today to make a presentation to the committee. And then with whatever time we have left, I would like to tee up a discussion regarding the ordinance I had submitted to the council that would amend the prohibition on overnight parking. So those are the 3 items we have, Mr. Chairman, and I guess after you approve the minutes, we could then jump into the energy plan.
Mayor, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Did you ask Mary or did you ask me? I thought you said Mary.
Mary.
Thought so.
Seconded.
So moved.
So moved. Sorry about
I'll
that.
second, and I think, and move it along. Okay, next topic. Approved.
All right. We're moving on to energy plan?
Yes, let's hear what you got.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Bernie Pelletier. We have Catherine Divinity, who's the town staff energy specialist, and as Matt Hart said, a number of citizens and other commissioners who are interested in this plan. My plan, and I'll just state it so you can amend it if you'd like, is I prepared a brief, call it introduction to the plan. The plan itself is kind of long, so I'd like to go through that. It gives you a little of the background. Alternately, we could flip through the deck. I have both up, and I'm thinking that we can go through this little slide deck that I put together in a few minutes, and then entertain questions and issues and concerns. That's okay.
I think the slide deck would be fine if you can.
All right, I will try to share that.
If you have the ability to share. If not, your writer can give you that ability.
I think
There we go. Excellent.
Have done it. So I must say, I think all of us, I'm going to keep it in this mode as opposed to presentation mode, if you can all read the text. So that way you can see what's coming next.
Yep.
We are all very excited to be at this point. This plan has been a long time in gestation. And so it's great to see the light of day and get close to have it go before the town council. So this didn't come out of thin air. The town has been the beneficiary of the current plan, which was constructed in March of 2009 at the request of the town council. It has really guided West Hartford for over a decade. It's been in the background, so I suspect that many people aren't even aware that it was there and sort of guiding us. But it has a focus on municipal operations and has done a good job, as you probably know. But Catherine reminds us fairly frequently that the municipal operations, town and municipal buildings are only 5% of West Hartford. So there's another 95% out there. You should know, if you don't, that this model was actually, it's really served other towns. It was widely imitated. In fact, sometimes imitated in a way that they didn't necessarily change all the words. So it reflects the West Hartford's commitment, many of which were made under Mayor Slifka, U.S. Conference of Mayors, EPA Community Energy Challenge, and it seems like ancient history, 20% of our municipal power was supposed to be renewable by 2010. It has some key achievements that's wrapped up. We have a municipal energy manager, and she is on the line today. It kicked off an energy audit of town buildings, and many of those recommendations are completed to the substantial benefit of the town, both energy-wise as well as financial-wise. There's been widespread adoption of solar on municipal buildings. I think we're up to 12 of our 16 schools have it now. And it has also served, even though it was a municipal plan, it served as a focal point for resident participation in town energy matters. And that's why some of the folks that are on the line, along with Catherine and myself, are here today. Very quickly, just a few compare and contrast. The new plan really expands to embrace the entire community. So that is to say the 5% that is municipal operations, residents, and businesses. In the time that we've had, even pre-pandemic, but even during the pandemic, we've conducted as much outreach as possible, trying to get as many points of view on this, pro and con. We've had library meetings. There's been a discussion at multiple Clean Energy Commission meetings. We have an outreach to some of our youth. The Sierra Club has been instrumental in getting this out to a broader community. We've presented to church groups, and we have presented to other town commissions. One of the things that this plan does is it brings metrics, as many numerical quantifications of ideas into the process. And it can be quantifying our participation in energized CT programs, or how much energy we are using and how much that costs the town. As Todd Dumais worked on the Plan of Conservation and Development, the POCD, we sought to have it incorporate by reference the energy plan. As you would know, the POCD is it's a little bit like the cicadas, a little every 10 years, I guess. But by incorporating this plan, which is a more nimble document, into the POCD, we feel we can both bring energy matters before the town, as well as update more frequently than every 10 years. And it is updatable. We have already shared this draft with other communities, and even before we adopt, there is some imitation, which, as we all know, is the sincerest form of flattery going on in other communities. An important factor, because of the events, speaking for myself and I think others, I was pretty much unaware of equity considerations. I'd say if you look at Bernie Pelletier a year ago, it wasn't something that was in my mind, and now it's very much in our collective mind, and it's very much part of this document. It's a pretty ambitious goal, and we have an overarching approach. And if you want to reduce it to a catchphrase, you can say reduce and then produce, and which is to say, through efficiency, beneficial electrification, and adoption of new technology, reduce our energy use as much as possible. So reduce it via conservation, strategic electrification. And strategic electrification is sort of a buzzword for let's stop using internal combustion engines to the extent possible, which are roughly, even the best of them are perhaps 30% efficient, to electric vehicles, which are more like 80% efficient. The second piece, and arguably the less important piece, because we see reduction taking up about 2/3 of where we need to get to, is adoption of clean and renewable power, both locally here in West Hartford, as we've done on our 16 schools and approaching 1,800 residents, as well as some commercial installations. We have a fair amount of solar already, but then beyond that, as the state and as ISO New England become more and more renewable, we're going to participate in that. So two-step overarching approach: reduce and then produce. As we come closer to actually how we want to engage this plan with the town, we really have divided it into 4 fairly obvious sectors. So there's the residents, of which we have maybe 25,000 households. Maybe 18,000 of those are individual homes of some sort, and then the remainder are some sort of apartments or condominiums. That's one sector. commercial and industrial. So all the buildings and all the businesses, how they run those businesses, transportation, and then adoption of clean energy. So the residents, commercial, transportation, and clean energy, those are the sort of the divisions of the plan. And with each one of those sectors, we are going to bring 4 key strategies to bear. They are seek as much input and equity as possible. So when you're dealing with residents, let's try to engage with residents across the economic spectrum, across the language spectrum, across the needs spectrum. Let's educate and outreach. Let's do education and outreach, which is extremely difficult. Reaching some populations is not easy. Leading to, we hope, so by reaching out, by educating, it will be our goal to increase the participation and adoption of clean energy measures. And then we have a 4th strategy, which is that as we do these activities, we are going to uncover needs for new policies and new plans. So that's, you will note that what's not here at this point is there are no mandates. There's nothing in this plan in these that is going to make anybody do anything. We hope to convince them to do a lot, but it's not a mandate-driven plan. Boiling it down, I tried to again turn this into a catchphrase, but we're focusing on today, and we've got an eye on tomorrow. And the way that's embodied is really on this particular slide, which I'm going to guess that maybe you can't read.
A little bit hard. I've got it up on my other computer, but on this screen, it's.
Yeah, let me see if I can to. Let's see. Well, maybe that's okay. Let's see if this will do it. That might make it a little bit better. But what we just in broad strokes, without necessarily having to go into this, you see on the left what we are planning to do now, 2021, 2022. Catherine wisely said that given the pandemic nature of this year, we should really think of now as 2021 and 2022. As I think you know, perhaps better than we, it's hard to get anything done in this environment. But it's divided into 2 chunks. So on the bottom is we're going to continue the focus that served us so well with the old plan on the municipal operations, and Catherine is the captain of that particular ship. And then in general, the 14 bullets above that are what we are going to strive to do with the business and residents. So we're actually seeking to, just to go through a few of them, to adopt the resolution to support 100% by 2050 and a new energy plan. We want to give regular updates to the Town Council and the Public Works and Facilities Subcommittee, that being you. We've toiled away in relative obscurity over this last decade. Sometimes that's good, but I think once in a while it would be good for us to just let you know what we're up to, and in turn get your guidance and your thoughts. One of the big, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but just a couple. One of the big things that we need to work on, and Joe Campanella on our commission has been really working on this one, is to develop an effective means of reaching the community. If we're going to do education and outreach, we have 63,000 people in West Hartford. It's really hard for for a few number of commissioners without having some sort of communication network. So we're have reached out to Renee McHugh. We're going to reach out to perhaps Kristen Gorski on economic development, as well as trying to become more adept as a 67-year-old can become with Facebook and other social media. And I'll stop there on that. We can come back to that if we like. And I just want to sort of end this part of it and just say, this is our vision. This is Catherine. Each commissioner has their favorite slide. Since I put this deck together, you have to look at my favorite slide. Although Catherine was the author of this slide, so. But this is an aspiration. We aspire for this community, our 63,000 people, 1,000 business buildings, to use 100% clean energy by 2050, and we think we can do it. And with that, I will try to stop sharing and see if there are questions that come to mind, concerns.
Excellent.
Want to take a deep dive on.
Right. Thank you, Bernie. Well, I will open up to questions from our committee first, and then other counselors if they're on the line. I thank you very much. And this is, and looking through this slide and as well as the full draft. It's just amazing work by your committee, and I thank you all for your work. And one thing I just want to do overall, how you envision, and this might be a question for Matt as well, but within city government, how we sort of envision it being rolled out to various departments. The coordination, I know obviously, John we advertised the electric, what was it? Lawnmower, yeah, they came out and in various efforts. And obviously with the schools, is there sort of administratively a plan for how we would integrate these goals with other town functions and purchasing and all that sort of thing? Again, whether that's for you or Matt, I'm not sure. I think it's in there, but I sort of want to highlight how we would, frankly, make it real. The aspiration is fantastic, but we got to make sure that this is a living document that is implemented and not just talked about. And I don't want to, and it shouldn't be all on your volunteers to disseminate.
If I could push myself to the head of the line and just say, I definitely have ideas on that. Idea one would be that whenever a capital project is undertaken, whether it's a building, purchase of a vehicle, design of a new street, although that we just say, are there more options than just modernizing and updating what we have now? Oftentimes we get into a groove and we just say, okay, we had this air conditioner 25 years ago. We're going to get whatever the latest, greatest model of its replacement is. And there are typically many more options now than there were 25 years ago that could do us. So just broadening the field of vision at the time anything is undertaken would be step one. And step two would be to use us. On our group, West Hartford Clean Energy Commission, we have a rocket scientist, we have an architect, we have a carbon capture man. Our Stephen Sack, who just joined, is a longtime businessman in West Hartford. So we have a lot of expertise that could be tapped. And all of you know this, that West Hartford has per capita a lot of brains and a lot of dimensions. So use them. I think most people would be happy to be participating in this.
Thank you, Matt. Did you want to?
Sure thing. Matt Hard, Town Manager. Thank you so much, Bernie, and your colleagues, and Catherine and Bob for all your hard work in putting together the plan. Now, let me start off, and then perhaps Bob and Catherine wish to add to my comments. We do have some good coordination in place now, particularly with respect to the procurement of energy and clean energy initiatives for the organization. We also have a coordinated program with respect to our fleet acquisition and maintenance. I know that Bob, certainly when we're looking at major renovations or even more simple renovations to existing facilities, we have an eye towards more sustainable products, clean energy products when we're doing that work. But to Bernie's point, I think we should take a critical review of our purchasing regulations and see if there's more we wish to add there from a sustainability perspective. Another thing I'm keenly interested in and have discussed it with Bob and Catherine is how do we measure our carbon footprint as an organization? Certainly looking at our HVAC components, but it's much broader than that. Trying to capture fleet and a variety of other things as well. So those are some steps that I think would be helpful. Again, taking a critical look at our purchasing regs to see if we want to add more language and more requirements there. And then secondly, trying to get a handle on our carbon footprint as an organization and producing some goals around that. So through you, Mr. Chairman, I would turn to Bob, Mr. Palmer, and Catherine, Ms. Divinity, to see if they want to add anything to my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Palmer, do you have any?
Sure. Bob Palmer, Director of Plant and Facility Services. So as Matt had indicated, we do try to take our project specifically for capital improvements and to put them through the lens of clean energy and improvements as much as we can. So we've done that informally for a number of years with Catherine on board and integrated. I mean, Catherine participates weekly in our CIP meetings, and we try to make sure that we have that focus in there. It's not formalized. It probably could be. We could do more with that, certainly. And we'd certainly be interested in tapping additional resources and to looking at alternative technologies that we haven't considered in the past as we move forward with our building improvements. So back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Divinity?
Yeah, Catherine Divinity, Energy Specialist for the town. So I am in agreement that I think the first step is that I think we need everyone to kind of agree that energy efficiency or emissions reductions is going to be one of the lenses that we use as we're considering what we do as a municipality, whether it's a project or a policy or anything. And I think one of the ways we can do that is by officially adopting this energy plan. And maybe this energy plan is not complete. We might at some future point broaden it into a climate action plan, which looks more broadly at emissions reductions. But I think this energy plan is the first step to agreeing that this is one of the lenses we're going to use holistically to look at how we operate as a municipality and as a community. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And let me just open it up to questions from the committee. Ms. Fay, a question?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Wintergrad, through you. I greatly support anything that helps with costs and cuts down our footprint and does a whole bunch of things. Clean energy is great and wonderful, so I'm a supporter. I was just wondering if there was sort of tactically an end game. I know there's been communities that have taken on things like geothermal heat and cooling. Certainly, I think the schools could benefit from that, so especially the older ones. How far is this plan going to go? I know solar panels and things like that are the first step. For lighting, that seems to be the easier one to attack. with panels on roofs, etc. What about some of the other kind of new things that are coming out? Can you guys kind of speak to that and how we plan to prepare for the future as more technology and, really kind of cool things come out in terms of heating and other energy sources? Thank you, Mr. Wintergrad.
Thank you. And whoever feels, Bernie, do you want to take a shot at that?
Well, first of all, that's a great comment. One of our schools, which is Charter Oak Academy, already has geothermal. So it's an all-electric school. And actually, to incorporate in my answer sort of Bob Palmer's comment about formalizing this idea, the Rocky Mountain Institute has a program that's called Zero Over Time. So that at every pivot point of capital investment, you survey the environment to see what is available. So geothermal is definitely a technology that makes sense at commercial and industrial level. But the other technology, the other heat pump technology that is available is what they call air source heat pumps, which have gotten orders of magnitude more effective in the short term, which is to say, even on a cold February day, they're able to draw enough heat into a home or a small office building that they can run on electricity in an efficient way, potentially being supplemented by something it's like, even if it's a fuel, it might be a sustainable fuel. It might be something like bioheat, which bioheat right now, I think it's 20% is displaced by the biofuel. There are advances that are on the table to move up that percentage. So in answer to your question, there are some existing technologies that we would promote, heat pumps and biofuels, and we will be on the lookout always to take advantage of new technologies.
Thank you very much. Ms. Anderson, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Winograd. First off, Mr. Pellet, thank you for the presentation, how educational this was. Just in this short period of time, I learned a lot of information, and now I'm really excited in terms of how much more information I can learn. So since I came on a little late, I heard when you were talking about reducing energy and then producing energy. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And then I also heard where you talked about education. And so I'm curious, as a town municipality, how can we, I guess, as we advance further, how can we then educate our community about some of the stuff that we're talking about here this morning?
So if I maybe start at the end, Catherine has had a long-standing relationship with the West Hartford Public Schools. I think all of our schools are what's called Greenleaf schools, if that program still exists. And I'll say pre-pandemic, we had regular sort of curricula that would go out on this topic. And I think it was substantial before, and I think we could amp that up. So to say we have a background that I think we could expand upon. And then jumping over to the how do we reduce? I guess one of the bad news, good news stories that we have in West Hartford, we have structures that have been around since I think 1600 or at least 1700, something like that, even older than me, I guess. And as a consequence, they were built with a different structure, with different levels of efficiency. We can retrofit a lot of buildings that are grossly inefficient now. I'm not talking about at the town and school level, but at the residential level. You can walk down your neighborhood after the first snow or the first frost and look at people's roofs, and you can see whether they're insulated or not. When you see snow melting on somebody's roof, that's essentially them taking a pile of money, setting it on fire. They're essentially heating the outdoors. We can stop that. And there are existing programs. So the HESS program, Home Energy Solutions program, and its sort of cousin, which is HESS IE, HESS Income Eligible, which is really free and offers really good benefits to income eligible people. we could take down our use a lot just by stopping heating the outdoors. That was a partial answer. Catherine, or any commissioners, would you add to that? If you,
I don't see anybody jumping up with their hands right now. But thank you for that answer. It is 8:33. I had incredibly unfairly told Bernie that he had 15 minutes, which was ridiculously optimistic or pessimistic, depending on your point of view. And we do have, I know we're not going to finish the discussion, but we do have another item that we do need to address this morning and give it a little bit of time as well. So if there aren't any other, I mean, obviously we have a report, everybody can read it. If there aren't any other pressing questions, I'd entertain a motion to approve the plan and move it on procedurally move it on to the full council for scheduling there. That's appropriate for Ms. Fay, Ms. Anderson. Is that
I agree.
consensus on that?
I think that sounds right, Ben. I would approve this plan for sure. So I think it's
Great.
ready to move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Ms. Anderson?
Yes, Ben, Council Wintergrad, I would agree. Yes.
Then we have consensus, and we'll move it along to the full council. And prior to that discussion, obviously everybody will have a chance to read through some frankly great use of PowerPoint. It can be a horrible device software, but sometimes it works well. And this particular presentation, it took a full advantage of some of the pluses of that software program. So thank you very much. We'll move on, but thank you again for you're free to stick around and observe our discussion of overnight parking.
Mr. Winograd, actually, I have a comment question.
Oh, yes, of course.
Mayor Cantor. Yeah, no, so I first of all, I want to thank Bernie and the commission for their incredible work on this. This has been an enormous amount of input and work and a really constant effort. So I really appreciate all that you've done. And also to Catherine and Bob Palmer for their commitment on clean energy. We really have been a leader in the region and the state, and it's been a challenge, and I really appreciate all they've done. Now that this committee is moving this on to the council, let me just ask about the procedure on that. So it would go on the agenda for probably the second June meeting, I'm guessing, or potentially the first June meeting, I'm not sure. And so, Mr. Hart, this is going to you. And then would the Clean Energy Commission do a presentation at that meeting? I just want to make sure that we communicate that as we have the commission here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt, Mr. Hart, would you like to respond on scheduling?
Sure. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Mayor, for your good comments and question there. So we will plan to bring this at one of the two June meetings. You know, we'll decide relatively soon which one would work best for the schedule, and looking at the other agenda items that we have. We do have at least one significant item for June 8th. But anyhow, I would certainly endorse a short presentation from the committee and staff at the council meeting. I think that'd be helpful. You know, and Mr. Pelletier and his colleagues could use pretty much the same slides they used today, I think.
Okay, and when you talk about the significant, yeah, thank you. Okay, thanks. We can talk about timing offline, but I do want to give the commission notice and make sure that they are available to also make any comments. And so this would be not subject to a public hearing. This would be a resolution and would be voted on the same day as that it is raised on the agenda, correct?
Matt Hart, Town Manager. That's correct, Mayor.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you. And obviously we had those offline discussions about scheduling. Mr. Campanella, I see you. Are you waving your hand or?
I just wanted to thank the committee and for hearing us and for the mayor and the councilors moving this forward. We really appreciate it. We look forward to presenting sometime in June.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all. It's much appreciated.
Great. So moving along, our next agenda item is sidewalks. Mr. Hart, I think you're the lead on this. We do have a memo in board docs that you sent on May 26th, but if you can walk us through that, and you did attach documents as well. And let's start this discussion, which I suspect will not conclude this morning, but the long history there. Matt, Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Matt Hart.
People are leaving, so you're jumping around on my screen. I'm looking for you.
Thank you. Again, Matt Hart, Town Manager. Yes, would like to tee up the discussion today, work through this memo a little bit, and encourage you to read it when you have a little more time. Got several of my colleagues joining me in this discussion. Let's see, we have Assistant Police Chief Larry Terra. We've got our Public Works Director, John Phillips. We've got Dwayne Martin, our Interim Director of Community Development and Town Engineer, and Cynthia Latour, our Assistant Corporation Counsel. So we have been meeting as a staff to discuss this issue a little bit, and it does have a long history. The prohibition on overnight parking that we have in place now. So I would encourage the committee, I don't think you need to rush through this. I would encourage you to take the time to work through it, because it is somewhat multifaceted. It's perhaps not as simple and straightforward as you might think. So you'll recall I presented the proposed ordinance to the full council at its meeting in early April. And the council subsequently referred the ordinance to you, for your consideration. And the language of the ordinance, as you may recall, it would allow me or whoever's sitting in my chair to exempt any street from the overnight parking ban we have in place right now. And that ban runs from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. year round. It's in effect year round. Now, there are a handful of streets around town where we have some tighter restrictions, and some of those restrictions were implemented more recently in areas west of center. And then we also have some streets, some collector streets, some arterial streets, etc., where we prohibit parking at any time of day. But the standard restriction we're talking about is that ban from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. And as we explain here in the memo, we did some legislative history. I want to thank Cynthia for that. She was able to find some information. I wouldn't call it a complete record, but this ban does go back several decades. And in the late 50s, the town manager at that point in time issued a regulation regarding overnight parking. And that regulation was a little bit different. It prohibited people from parking a vehicle on town streets for more than 3 consecutive hours between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. So 20 years later, roughly 20 years later, the regulation was converted into an ordinance similar to what we have in place today. And at that point in time, one of my predecessors cited that the ban was really necessary for law enforcement reasons. And it appears as though we established some version of our existing omit system at that point in time. And you're probably all familiar with the parking omit system, but that allows a resident, and it's now an electronic system, or they can still do the old-fashioned phone call, to request a time-limited exception to park a vehicle overnight on street. We do think that the town has looked at eliminating the ban over the years. We did find an interesting memo written back in 1980 from an assistant to the town manager, a Mr. Palmquist, who was serving in that role at that point in time. I think that was interesting reading. There was a group of staff that got together and talked about whether or not they should recommend removing the ban. They ultimately decided against it. They thought that the ban should remain in place. Some of the reasons they cited were concerns about lost ticket revenue, damage to road curbing, interference with snow removal and street cleaning, as well as the increased incidence of nuisance activities and as well as theft, potential theft, and automobile accidents. So back at that point in time, they decided to keep it in place. However, some of the barriers to permitting overnight parking that staff has identified in the past, those barriers no longer exist today. For example, overnight parking in and of itself does not conflict with waste collection activities, as long as residents and other drivers do not park their vehicles in front of the waste receptacles. Our waste management system, as you know, it's more automated now. It used to be much more labor intensive. And so we don't have that conflict as long as people, park accordingly. In addition, with today's technology, and this is commonplace across the country, John, in his role as Public Works Director, has the ability to issue a separate parking ban for a weather event. And that is a practice he has engaged in for many, many years now. So when a storm is coming, we issue a parking ban, and we have the ability, through a whole variety of media to get that out. And then lastly, and this is very important, our police department no longer feels that overnight parking in and of itself would lead to increased criminal activity or make it harder for the police to spot something while on patrol. Moving on. So you'll recall that we lifted the parking ban. I lifted it in the early days of the pandemic, and we remain in that status, acting under the mayor's declaration of emergency. Our reasoning for suspending the ban was that we had more people staying at home, working at home, home from school, etc., and more vehicles, more people at home that needed a place to park. So during this 13 to 14 month time frame that the ban has been suspended, we've only received a small number of complaints. Most of them, though, do concern nuisance activity, concerns about litter, concerns about perhaps intoxicated people walking on the street, making noise, etc., creating noise. So our engineering division has conducted an analysis, and I would reference the attached map. Take a look at it when you have time. And they've identified a total of almost 13,000 residential units located along local roads that have both curbs and sidewalks. So we're not talking about arterial roads there. We're not talking about the small roads that lack a sidewalk. Another interesting data point is that our ban is pretty unique for a town of our size and our density. So just a couple notes on that. Manchester maintains a seasonal ban, December 1st through April 1st. Several communities have a seasonal ban in place. Weathersfield and Newington also have overnight parking bans. They have an OMIT system like we do. The cities, Hartford and New Haven, Stamford, they allow overnight parking either through a residential parking zone as well as a residential parking permit. So for purposes of teeing up your discussion, and I understand that our time is short, we see three primary approaches for your consideration, and obviously there'd be all sorts of permutations under these three approaches. But the first we would suggest you consider would be to approve this ordinance with the understanding that we would establish an overnight parking permit for residents only for residents, for use on a limited number of local streets or within a specified geographic area. Some of the benefits of this approach, it would provide homeowners and other residents with more parking capacity. And this is not just an issue for our single-family homes. We have heard that some of our, and this is a historic issue, some of our older apartment complexes, think about the complexes on Farmington Avenue east, towards the east end of town, they have historically struggled to provide adequate parking for their residents. You know, they were built in a time when people had fewer cars. And we've heard more recently that some of these complexes have either lost or stand to lose their parking leases on adjoining properties. So that's going to limit their capacity even more. So creating this capacity on street could help us to maintain some of the most affordable housing units in our community. Another benefit associated with this, and I don't want to overemphasize this, but we do see this as an issue. So if we were to provide people with an overnight permit, we could reduce the need that homeowners have, that apartment owners have, to construct more parking areas on their property. What's the problem with that? When people add more pavement, they're adding more impervious cover. They're contributing to our runoff and our flooding. In and of itself, that's small, but when you take the collective weight of this across town, it can be significant. And Dwayne can comment on the large number of permits we receive on an annual basis to expand driveways and construct other parking areas. Now, looking at the drawbacks associated with this approach, permitting any type of overnight parking could lead to an increase in nuisance complaints, as well as a perceived loss of privacy for some residents. Some residents have contacted us. They're concerned about an unknown car parking in front of their house. They understand it's a public street. They don't own the street. They don't own that section of the street. But still, there's some concern about having somebody they don't know parking overnight in front of their home. And at least one apartment owner is concerned about how this could negatively impact their property values because they have adequate parking. Trying to wrap up quickly here, another broad approach could be to approve the ordinance with fewer restrictions. For example, don't require a permit system. So the benefits of that, you know, you'd be able to provide more capacity. We could reduce the need to create more impervious cover. However, as far as drawbacks are concerned, we do see more drawbacks with this approach. If we did not require a permit, we'd have less ability to regulate the use. You know, that could result in abandoned or inoperable cars parked on our local streets. That's not something we want to see. Certainly, Larry and his colleagues, Chief Terra, would be dealing with increased frequency of nuisance complaints, and then we would have that privacy issue that I cited. And if we permitted this overnight parking on our smallest streets without a curb, we'd probably damage the road. We may limit access to emergency vehicles, and we'd create obstacles for pedestrians and cyclists. And then the third main approach for your consideration would be to just keep what we have in place. You know, keep the parking ban in place. But that would not allow us to create additional parking capacity. Again, I cited that some apartment complexes are struggling with this. We would continue to see applications for more driveways, et cetera. So that is a quick review of the memo I provided. Would recommend you read it when you have more time and continue this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Looking. Did the chief leave?
No, AC Terra is still here.
Oh, there he is. I'm sorry.
Please lead on this.
Doing my Zoom search and I walked right over you. If you could comment, I mean, my recollection, you know, was always that whenever this came up in the past, that it was pretty much vetoed by the department. And there was sort of the issue raised, you know, it's great to drive down Farmington Avenue at the middle of the night and just know that everything is quiet because you don't see any cars on the street. And that was always, you know, how I heard the issue that sort of trumped everything else. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that view has changed over the years?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Larry Terra, Assistant Police Chief. So, you know, we're all thinking about all the negatives that happened with the pandemic, but actually, this gave us an opportunity to see what really goes on with the parking ban. As the town manager mentioned, it was suspended. We had not, you know, people would think we'd have more issues, but we really didn't, which was one thing. The other thing too is, as many have seen, that the town's changing. A lot of these streets that we're concerned with, that the people need to park on the street, though they have no other place to park because of the you know, the apartment buildings and all that. The other thing I'm looking at is, at the end of the day, whatever balance we strike, we'll enforce it just like we have in the past. We just do what we have to do. We're dealing with different things now that they did back in the 50s when they passed this, before I was born. Got to take advantage of that because I am getting up there. But like we all are. We are seeing different things now. The types of crimes that maybe they were concerned about back then, we're not seeing anymore. You know what we're facing now, where, you know, the unlocked vehicles, the burglaries from cars and all that. So we're seeing different things now, the stolen vehicles and so on. Will it impact the way we do our jobs? Clearly it will not, because we're going to continue to find ways to do what we have to do. And as you brought up, Mr. Chairman, that driving down the street in the middle of the night, yes, there are some obstacles with more vehicles on the street, but we have to do our jobs one way or another. Maybe it'll force our guys to get out of the cars and walk around a little bit more around the cars. So there's things that we can deal with. The parking ban issue for weather related. I remember in Canton when we were there, we only had it during the winter months for snow removal. But this year we've proven every time DPW wants a parking ban for weather, we're there, we're yanking cars for them. Especially I've learned about the larger plows that they have now to make it down certain streets. So again, I don't know if this helps you or not, but we're flexible. Some of the needs that it was in place for previously are gone. But again, it is one of those perception type things. And we do get abandoned cars still. We still get parking issues that we have to deal with as recent as this week. We actually had somebody, had traffic go out there and they marked. We have to be able to tell if a car is moving, if it's abandoned. So we old-fashioned way, we mark them with chalk. So they reported back to me on that for one situation. So I don't know if this helps you. We're kind of in between, but we will support whatever the decision is, and it's going to be a tough balance to strike because you're not going to make everybody happy. You know that, unfortunately. But my concern is that the people who really need the parking because they don't have it where they live are going to be probably penalized the most. And we really have to look at that because we're here to service everybody in town, if that helps. Not sure if I answered your question or not.
No, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. With a few minutes we have left, cutting people off without a lot of opportunity, but questions from the committee that you want, and maybe even, or things you'd like to have addressed next time, at least to raise issues if we don't get answers.
Council Winograd, I have a quick question, and it's probably for Assistant Chief Tara. Not sure, but for those older apartment complexes on Farmington Avenue and other areas in town, and when it does snow or we're having a storm, where do those cars park? Do they park at some of the areas that we're talking about where they're beginning to lose their leases, or what? How does that work? I guess that's my question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Phelps will probably be able to address that because we do have designated parking areas for them.
Through the chair, John Phillips, Director of Public Works. What we offer is obviously all of our public lots, school lots, park lots, people can go to. We have some use of that, but certainly not by the extent of people that do use the on-street parking. A lot of cars go into their parking lots of their facilities. Maybe they're double parking. And that's just a case where this on-street is sometimes just more convenient than parking in some of the parking lots that those older buildings offer. As Chief mentioned or Town Manager mentioned, there are some leases that those apartment buildings have, but I guess they're up against some expiration dates, so they're going to be some challenge moving forward. Outside of that, you know, people make a decision whether to find a place to put their car, ask a friend, a neighbor, or you utilize some of the areas that we offer them to put their car.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Ms. Fay, did you have any, you like to make a comment or question?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Wintergrad. Through you, just a general observation. What would be the metrics that we put in place before implementing one of the three methods that Mr. Hart outlined? What would be the metrics for success? In other words, how do we know if we go to option 1 or 2? Clearly, option 3 was staying the same. How do we know that it's working or improving, or it's actually not working and there's harm in the way of implementing this? Can someone describe what we'd be looking at to make sure that whatever we implemented was successful? Thank you.
Mr. Hart.
Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Councilor Fay, for your good questions there. I think, first of all, we should come back with some additional data, and we have some of it. Brooke Nelson, in our parking operations manager, has conducted additional research. I think it'd be interesting to hear from her on what a parking permit system could look like. We do have, or we could acquire the software to handle that now. I think it would be useful for you to review the number of driveway applications we receive on an annual basis. If we were to establish a permit system, we could try it as a pilot and then measure the type of nuisance complaints we might receive, whether or not we need, to what extent we have conflicts with snow removal operations, et cetera. So, you know, I think there are a variety of things we could do, but I would start by coming back to you with a little bit more detail and a conversation about how a permit system could work.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. One thing that I'd be curious about is, I mean, right now we obviously know which cars are registered in town. We also know that does not cover all cars that are in our town. But wondering whether or not there's technologically possible to, you know, use one list for the other. And I think even short of registration, we actually know who the residents are, or at least the ones who are complying with the law and have registered their cars. And maybe that's a way to convince people that that's a good idea to get their cars registered locally. But if there's a way to sort of make that automatic, just a thought. I mean, one, it's interesting is that the permitting system would address probably the biggest real issue of people who actually don't have other parking options or affordable parking options, and who would have an intent to stay overnight. It doesn't sort of solve the issue of people like me who just at 10 o'clock at night have to decide, okay, we've moved cars around. Am I going to go up in my pajamas and move that car in the driveway or not? And or do I risk the ticket that I've gotten on more than one occasion? And I'm not going to buy a permit for that laziness. It just, but it would be nice if, as a homeowner, if I didn't have to worry about it. But so I don't know whether there's some, sort of thought again of making it automatic and basically just knowing who our residents are registered cars. But again, I don't know whether that different systems would work with that or not. So just a thought, at least to see the viability of sort of making it automatic for those who've registered.
Mr. Winograd, can
yes.
Mayor Cantor?
Yes, Mayor.
So Mr. Hart, Matt, I think it was very helpful. Your presentation was great. And the data is really important. And Mary's question, I think, is right on. I think we need metrics and feedback to kind of keep moving forward. So what I would like to see the data that you mentioned, the amount of driveway permits, maybe the ticketing revenue, all the components and concerns that we the nuisance complaints, all of those kinds of things, and the amount of omit that we receive as well. So I think all that would be really helpful for our next step. And the permitting system, I remember that was a challenge before. We weren't sure that was something that we could do. So I want to make sure we hear about that and how that would work. So, and I do think it's important to actually start with a higher, sort of take steps. We can, I don't see this as one and done. I think this is going to be something that will continue to evolve. So I would suggest, and I will have discussions on this, but a permitting system would make sense, because we have had we have had occasional complaints about cars that have been abandoned or sat for a very long time, and I think those kinds of things are really helpful to control. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So before we can conclude today, we have a quick discussion about scheduling while we're here. I think we're having a meeting and not hearing much from John. We're not doing our staff reports. We obviously have lost a little bit of the ability to give staff the respect of hearing what's going on in their departments. I think we should consider going back to monthly meetings as it becomes technologically viable, as town hall opens up and we can, do live, and if we can have West Hartford Community Interactive be involved, great. I think we should try for some hybrids, but I don't know that we have to be tied to only being able to meet with their schedule. And then obviously it's hard to cover every meeting. So at least we should, Mr. Hart, what's been the sort of latest on reopening as to when we can start having?
We're Matt Harttown manager. We're ready, Mr. Chairman. We're ready, Ben.
Okay.
We have the capability. You can start meeting again in person, and I do think it would be a good idea to resume a monthly schedule, understanding, there might be a couple of times a year when you want to take a time out. But, this is going to be a business item you're going to want to spend time on. As you said, we want to resume our staff reports, et cetera. That would be beneficial to us. So just coming up with a regular date and time that works for the committee. I know we had one pre-pandemic, and hopefully that still works.
Okay, I think we'll do that offline, but members, we'll send out some emails on that and see whether the old dates work, or if we have to switch to a different day. But I think that we should at least start doing that. We'll see, how it goes over the summer, but I do think we'll return to the monthly meetings, and we can talk about offline about the scheduling of when those can occur. But thank you all. With that, I'll take a motion to close.
So moved.
All right. Thank you all very much for coming out this morning, and so have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks, everybody.